It's the future. In its arrogance and pride, mankind, in attempting to become gods themselves, awakened an ancient eldritch abomination, which caused the apocalypse, and now the remnants of humanity live within fortresses, desperately trying to survive in a ruined world. All the while, humanity is plagued by giant, abstractly shaped creatures against which conventional weapons are useless. And so humanity had to create a series of biomechanical mechs that combined human DNA with the DNA of the eldritch abominations that are trying to wipe them out. However, these machines could only be piloted by teenagers and not adults. Meanwhile, humanity is being lied to about the true nature of the robots that they pilot, about the state of humanity, about what caused the apocalypse, by a council of faceless members that control the world from behind the scenes that have Gnostic plots to force the evolution of humanity into an immortal god in which all souls are brought together to create one super being and eventually leave the earth behind. The pilots are treated like soldiers, suffering from severe PTSD, personality conflicts, and the show alternates between being this intense apocalyptic robot action show and very innocent, wholesome slice of life with a bunch of drama and depressing stuff thrown in. Our main character is an abject failure who, in the very first episode, vows that he will not run away. Literally, it says that. And is kind of a loser, but he discovers that he has a hidden talent. He's able to pilot the most powerful of the robots, but only in unison with a girl who is both very taciturn and odd and alien, but also beautiful, and also kind of jealous of him and flirts with him in a really awkward, often abusive way. It gets angry when other women talk to him. As time goes on, our main characters uncover more and more that they've been lied to, and that the enemy they thought was their enemy wasn't actually their enemy. And the real enemy is the transhumanist Gnostic cult that wants to destroy humanity. And that there is actually a lot of things that are sympathetic against the eldritch abominations they fought. And the name of that show is Evan Darling in the Franxx. Yeah, not Evangelion. Darling in the Franxx. So I just like to say right off the bat, I'll try not to talk about this too much. This show is obviously really, really heavily inspired by Ava, to the point where a lot of the lines feel like they were either taken from it or were are references to it. Now, am I going to say that this show is like a ripoff or something, or that that's a bad thing? No, I mean, lots of things are reimagining of other things. Lots of things take a lot of different aspects from other stuff and put a spin on it. Like Shield Hero, it takes a spin on the whole izukai genre. I don't like ReZero, but I don't dislike it because it's trying to do something different and to kind of be a more self-reflexive version of the genre. There's nothing really wrong with this, very obviously being so strongly based on Ava that you could almost, I don't know if you could call it a remake or a reimagining, but I'd say this show is a lot more close to Ava than Q was, than 3.0 was, and probably than what Thrice Upon a Time will be. So yeah, this is very, very clearly inspired by it. Zero Two is kind of this strange cross between Rei and Asuka. Hero is kind of like a Shinji if he was a lot more charismatic and brave. So yeah, it is very clearly I mean, if they're going to claim it wasn't based on Ava, I'm going to have to press X to doubt on that one because I mean that's very clearly the case. But how is it? How is it as a Ava alternative or something else? Well, I'll do my best to kind of cover it in this episode, but I might have to make a couple videos because I have a lot to say about this one. So, firstly, I guess just to get out of the way, what would I give this show out of 10? I'd probably give this show like a 5 or 6 out of 10, but that's like a 5 or a 6 with an asterisk. This show had a lot of potential. This could have been like an 8 or 9 out of 10. This could have been, I don't know if one of the all-time greats is true, but this could have been really solid and really explored some interesting themes, but they just really screwed it up, particularly towards the halfway point and beyond. And the ending to this is like, once again, they took a page out of Ava's playbook, but they didn't really do it as well, just because there's a lot more plot elements that they needed to wrap up in this than they did in Ava. And they just introduced a lot of just random stuff in the last minute that like Ava didn't. But it's very frustrating because I can even see like when I'm watching this, it reminds me a bit of Code Geass, because Code Geass is, I like it, but it cries out for like chainsaw, like someone to take a chainsaw to it and remove a lot of the fan service and remove a lot of like the side content and just like dumb stuff. Like the whole thought elevator thing could have been removed. It kind of has the same issue that Code Geass has, where you had a very clear set of stakes up to the actual conclusion, and then the stakes just completely get thrown out in favor of like inserting this random over the top nonsense that kind of detracts from the rest of it. This is going to be a multi-part series, so I'll do a video just talking about the ending. But I don't think I've ever seen an anime series where they got to like the last couple episodes and they were like, "Oh crap. We literally haven't resolved anything. In fact, not only have we not resolved anything, we're just going to keep introducing new plots." And it got to the point where the last episode was literally just entirely exposition. Like it was entirely just tell don't show, which I don't even necessarily have a problem with, but it was just very unnecessary that they kept shoving stuff in. Now, Ava had a bunch of elements that were introduced near the end. In particular, you had the birth of Nerve, episode 21. Although I think episode 21 resolved more questions than it opened. You also had episode 24 with Kawaru that added a whole bunch of other stuff into the lore. But I think, once again, with the exception of the massive episode 24 plot hole, which I've done a separate video on in the past, I think Ava 24 resolved more than I think it resolved more questions than it opened up. We got a much better idea of Gendo and Sele's motivations. We got a better idea of what the angels were. We had kind of a conclusion of Asuka's plot line. We got kind of a confirmation of who or what Rei is. You had kind of a conclusion of Shinji's plot line. I think they actually did resolve a lot of things. Now, episode 25 and 26 really didn't resolve the plot in any meaningful way, but it did thematically resolve it. And I feel like Darling in the Franxx didn't thematically resolve itself or resolve itself in terms of the plot. There was no like winding down, there was no like definitive, this is it, this is the end. That was kind of consistent with the rest of it. Like the ending of Ava, and I mean that before we get to 25, 26 or the movie, you had Asuka in a coma, you had Rei had died and been reincarnated and she didn't have her memories. You had Shinji, who was a complete emotional wreck, and you had Nerve that had just kind of completely fallen apart. And it was a logical consequence of the rest of the series. And if you go back and you look through it, it was, you could see very much that that's what it was heading towards. And there was a progression over the series to things getting darker and darker and more abstract and more crazy. It's not like what they did with this show, where just one episode they just insert something that almost changed the genre. There was much more of a gradual transition, as it were. I think kind of another interesting difference between the two is Ava, I think, was a lot more character focused. It's not to say this isn't character focused, but I feel like Darling spends a lot more time on world building. largely to its detriment, whereas Ava spends very little time on world building and is kind of hyper focused on the characters, the Avas themselves, and kind of the philosophical issues. Where in this show, they throw a lot of importance on the rest of the world, the galaxy. You got all these different like alien species you're dealing with, and it doesn't really focus on any of them or really kind of provide enough context for you to care about any of it. It does the best when I think the best episodes were like the slice of life episodes when the characters were interacting with each other. Or I think the best episode was the one where they go into the city, but I'll talk about that probably in part 2 of this. But I just feel like they went really broad, but they didn't deliver broad. And instead they just kind of delivered something more character driven, but the show really wasn't character driven. It just is weird. I don't know if they had like a creative team working on this and the team didn't really communicate much with each other or whatever. But once again, it's very disappointing. I didn't hate the show. I wouldn't say it's a bad show, but it's something that I think had a lot of potential, and a lot of the mistakes they made with this, I think could have been corrected very easy. And I think it would have been easier to fix them than it would have been to leave it like it is. Like once we get into the last couple episodes, I don't even know where they got that from. It's like they played Robotech Battle Cry or something, and they're like, "Oh, this is cool. Let's just throw this in, even though it has no context." So, is it a worthy kind of Ava reimagining? I guess you could say. Well, I think it's a lot better than Q and probably Thrice Upon the Time will be, because the characters are likable. I don't really care that much about the mech designs. The characters are likable. The themes will not really explored are interesting. Probably part 2 of this review will be me talking about the various themes involved in Darling in the Franxx, and then part 3 will probably be about the ending. So overall, I think it's not a bad show. I'd probably recommend it. We'll do a much deeper dive next time.